My name is Lori H. Schwartz, and I'm an independent consultant. I have my own business. It's called Storytech, and it's focused on working with storytellers, technology companies, brands, and media companies, and actually helping them get together to make things happen. And it manifests at a lot of big trade shows and conferences and at people's offices. And a lot of it is just about getting them to meet each other and talk to each other. And at the heart of it is telling a story about what they each do. And that is all storytelling, because in order to explain how something works, like a new technology or a new consumer behavior or a new trend, something as simple as, what the iPad is doing, you have to talk about it in a way that people understand it. And the way that people understand it is you tell a story about it. And the way that I do it is I tell a story usually about my life and my cohort, my demographic. But then I can also share stories about other things. And you're doing it in a business environment, so you can't be too goofy about it. But at the same time, no matter who somebody is in a business environment, they're still a human being. And so if you can reach them on that storytelling level, when you explain to them about a technology trend, a new consumer behavior, something really complex and overwhelming, they get it right away. And then they love you because you're giving them the gift of knowledge, but you're doing it in a way where they don't feel foolish and they can contextualize it into their own life. And so that's how we came up with the name Storytech, was that we're telling a story about technology. This last Consumer Electronics Show, which is a big technology show that happens in Vegas every year, and that's really where I launched my company and where I sort of framed out a lot of what I'm doing. So I remember I was taking a bunch of very prominent C-suite executives, all like, the chief executive officer and the marketing officer and all the biggies. And I was walking them around all these connected devices. And what we talked about, there was one in particular, and it was, and this is going to sound really weird because I was talking to mostly men in this particular situation, but it was actually these breast milk cups that were connected to the internet, and they were battery operated. And what they did was they would, the women could put them on, get the milk, and then the phone would alert them through the Wi-Fi when they were done. And then when it knew that you had run out of milk bags, it would ping the server and you would get sent milk bags, right? And then it would also serve up content about being a new mother, so that the site that managed the product also became a publishing arm about motherhood. So what that does is that tells the story about what a new publisher has to be, what a new product manufacturer has to be. It speaks to fulfillment. And it basically speaks to the life cycle of a product. Totally taking the onus off of a product manufacturer, a publisher, a technology company, and wrapping them all into one entity. And so what you're starting to see on a show floor like the Consumer Electronics Show is a publisher and a tech company and a designer partnering now for the first time on those types of solutions. So going back to that breast company solution, that was just a women's health company who solved for an issue, because when women are breastfeeding and they're pumping, they're stuck in a seat. And you have all these women going back to work or working from home, and sitting in the same place for even 45 minutes just stinks. So the fact that these cups have now allowed them to be mobile and get everything done, right? And then also the fact they don't have to think about, should I order the bags? And it seems really silly, but taking that off their plate is a huge relief. So that's the story about the technology. And that makes sense to me. And that's in the life cycle of somebody. And so I started out wanting to do theater. I was a theater major. I went to Tufts University. I studied theater. And what I learned there, and it was a liberal arts program, but what I learned there is that you have to think about in September what's going to happen in December. And that you have to work with the entire team along that whole process, so that all the people on your team are set up to win on the journey from September to December. So the first cold reading to opening night, how do you get there? And that's what I learned with my drama major. And I find that so impactful on a daily life, in my daily life, because when I'm working on projects, what do I have to give my team to make them successful? How do I get to the final deliverable? No matter what you're doing, being able to tell a story and communicate that story and what you're trying to get done with all the people you're working on the project with is the most important thing. I worked on a visual effects movie, a movie called Kazam.
I am Kazam!
Well, I'm really happy for you.
Probably nobody has seen, but it was actually with Shaquille O'Neal. And the director was Paul Michael Glazer. I was his assistant, and I learned all about visual effects. And so I started getting into visual effects and to the technology side of storytelling. And that was the time the desktop Mac revolution was happening. And so I got my hands on Final Cut Pro when it was first released. And I started being an assistant at Final Cut Pro classes at Apple. And then I was like one of the only kids on the block with Final Cut Pro. And then I got hired at an internet agency. And so I was doing all these things to just make a living while I was shooting shorts. And I was also doing theater because I was a performer. And I was just doing anything I could do. And all of it came together ultimately, and I found myself working at a large advertising agency. It just kind of happened. It was not my plan. And I had all these skills of being someone that was constantly looking at new technology, was a good storyteller, was used to speaking in front of people a lot from my theater major. And I ended up becoming in charge of like new technology at an ad agency. And that's really what happened to me. And it all happened in LA. Right place, right time. I recommended to my leadership that we create an environment where people could play with new stuff. And I became the new stuff girl. And I started going to big trade shows, and I started speaking on panels, and I started sort of evangelizing this idea of not to be afraid of what you don't know, but to just go and play with it and figure out what it does, and then how do you use it. Industry work, participating in the industry that your chosen career in is very important. One, it's networking, so you meet a lot of people. Two, you constantly should be figuring out how do you feed your knowledge about your business, and then how do you also mentor and meet younger folks who are maybe going to work for you one day. And so you want to find people that you can learn from, and then people that you can teach. So I started doing a lot of industry work, and I got invited to be in the Television Academy because I was doing a lot of work in emerging media. And the TV Academy had a bunch of people who were looking at what is the future of television. And so I started getting involved. And then someone asked me to run for governor. And I said, okay, I'll run. And I didn't know what I was in for at all. And I ended up getting it. And so I served as governor for 4 years. So every month I would go to the Television Academy, and that's the institution that gives out Emmys. I had no idea. I was just like, okay, this is like, I'm doing this. But what it turned out to be this wonderful thing of where I was actually sitting in a boardroom with professionals who were involved in all the trades of television. So writers, directors, hair and makeup people, camera people, all the people that make a TV show. And I became, and along with whoever my co-governor at the time was, the experts on new media and digital and what was happening next with TV. The problem is in our business, in our space, in digital and immersive and in all interactive, it's constantly changing. And so the biggest challenge with our peer group and the work that we're doing, and anyone who's doing digital, is for a few months, it all makes sense. You're calling it this, and everyone knows what you mean, and then it changes. And so what we've kind of defined is a few different areas of digital content. So the first one is interactive media, which is any type of content that impacts the audience. The audience is participating in some way. And it could be tweeting back to affect the storytelling of a program. So whatever the format is, interactive media is an area that we've categorized, and it really is about participation. Then the next type of media that we've defined is immersive. And immersive includes some of the newer technology content models like virtual reality, augmented reality, and a combination of those, mixed reality. And these are various types of content where, in the case of virtual reality, you have to put on goggles, and the experience is such that you're physically, feels like, immersing yourself in an environment. And the digital quality of it, the content is so real that you feel like you're in that environment. Then augmented reality is when you're in your regular world, but the content comes to you. And then mixed is the two together. So we've had to say, okay, that's separate from interactive media. This is immersive, right? So now we have interactive media and we have immersive. So now we've defined those two sets, and we have professionals working in those areas. And they're very different, right? I can watch interactive media on my TV right now or my mobile phone. I need headsets or goggles or something and other tech for this. And then another area, and this stands for another area, is experiential. And experiential, which is a word that's used a lot now with marketing and with events, is when someone is experiencing content physically, when they go to an environment and they do something and something happens to them. And we're seeing that a lot with live theater where you participate. There's a show in New York that's kind of famous for sort of launching this more widely called Sleep No More, where you're actually involved in the storytelling with the actors. So that's one form of experiential. Another form is when you go to a big trade show and say they're advertising like South by Southwest did, you go and you're actually in Westworld. Was they put a bunch of attendees in a bus, they took them to an environment and they dumped them into this environment, and it was Westworld, but in real life. And then they had actors pretending to be the androids. And so you went through as if you were in the TV show. And so that's a form of experiential. So that's becoming more popular, especially as the generation coming up is demanding experiences over things. And so you're seeing content creators and storytellers trying to move in that direction by delivering on an experience rather than just on something you watch. Always keeping our eye on what's next because there's always something new. The biggest thing I've noticed, the biggest change, is that all of this tech no longer operates in its own, and I'm going to use a real buzzword, in its own singularity. So you can't really talk about the impact of 5G without talking about AI. And the only reason we're talking about AI is because 5G is allowing AI to actually provide solutions. Because before, computers couldn't process and ping and get the information back to make the device do the thing that is so cool with 5G. Well, the reason AI, we're talking about it now, is because the faster the network is, the more AI can activate and deliver on the solution that's prominent to us. So all these things that we're now looking at are all interdependent. And it's very hard now as a trendmeister to identify a singular trend and say it operates over there. Let's talk about 5G. Well, how do I do that without talking about all these other things? So that makes it more complex, but more interesting. One of the areas at the Consumer Electronics Show that over the recent years has changed the most is the automotive section. So I remember like 5 years ago, the North Hall in the Las Vegas Convention Center was the automobile hall, and it was not very well attended. Nobody went there. And it was the only people that went there were like car heads because it was just like big wheels and big radio systems and speakers. You know, it was like anyone who wanted to like make their car really crazy. And then one year, and this was only a couple of years ago, there was a car in Intel's booth in a different hall. And everyone was like, what the hell is that car doing there? And it was the first time that we started talking about connected cars. Everyone was like, oh my God, that's so cool. But also, why is a car in this hall? And then the next year it was about, well, actually there's a whole computer in your car and it's doing some things that you no longer have to do. You know, like it's warning you not to park too close to that curb, or it's actually stopping. And so all the levels of automation became an idea. And now that North Hall is like the top hall that anyone wants to go to because that car now represents mobility, and it's going to change cities. And also the car is going to become a moving living room, so it impacts content creators. It may also become a moving emergency room. It's going to have broadband, so maybe it becomes a moving school. It's going to move around kids and elderly people who maybe in the past used to not be able to move around a lot. And that's all within 5 years. And it started with a car showing up in another hall. I think that, and this is something that I looked at 10, 15 years ago, which is integration of capabilities. So I don't think media buying and planning cannot be talking to creative. And I don't think creative cannot be talking to tech. And so I think tech, creative, and media need to be integrated. And in a lot of the agencies that are doing well, they are. They'll show up to a client with a team. Well, what platform is it going to be on? And then once you know what tech is delivering that platform, then the creative can say, okay, well, what can I do on it? And then how is the person going to watch it and how many times are they going to get it? And then, oh, then I can do this. And so none of those things can operate in silos anymore. So I would always want someone to understand that the agencies of the future, and they may not even be called agencies anymore, are not going to be based on the old manufacturing model of we have a research period of time where we develop a product and we do a lot of marketing research on it. And then once we know we have a great product, we move it into sales, and sales sells that product. And then we get consumer feedback, which goes back to research. And, you have all these separate departments and this long cycle of how a product moves through our world. I just don't think that's the case anymore. So we're having to find ways to get things, get feedback, get it made, and get it delivered faster now. And so you can't depend on these siloed expertises anymore. People need to have multiple skill sets. If you're a great writer, you better understand how someone is going to be reading your work. What's the platform they're reading on? How will it work? And then what's the data that comes back to you that lets you know when did they stop reading and why? And what should happen when they stop reading? Should they get a message? Should the light turn off on the device? Like what? So you have to really have a real Renaissance sense of everything. I think students that are willing to work across categories and in areas that they are not interested in but need to have skill set in. I would put together teams, and have them work on projects together. One class that I taught that I thought was very helpful was we just put together like teams of 5 and we made them produce a 3-minute iPhone movie. And so one of them had to be the writer and one of them had to be the cinematographer and one of them had to be the set designer. And they were all doing things they've never done before. But that's the kind of thinking that you have to bring to the table now because things are changing so fast. And even though you may have a skill in a certain area, you're going to need to understand how all the other areas work more than ever before. Besides stay out of the sun, take care of your knees and lower back, brush your teeth too.
Sorry.